I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast, where we dive into the science of health and well-being.
Hello, Darren. Nice to see you again today.
Lovely to see you as always, Simon.
We're going to be exploring today another fascinating topic. Fascinating, I think, in the area of behavioural change, and it's a topic around the idea of habits and habit formation, and really how we can both build and sustain changes in our behaviour. And you and I both know that this is a significant challenge in lifestyle medicine. We know that lifestyle medicine is an endeavour that does require engagement from the patient. Does require the patient often to sometimes in small ways, sometimes significantly modify their day-to-day behaviours, and that presents itself a whole raft of challenges for how we might go about that, and importantly, also connects with a whole lot of beliefs that we might have about habits and how they form and how we sustain new habits and so on. So I'm going to start by asking you to recall a time when you formed a habit for yourself, where you started modifying your behaviour in some way and allowed that to develop into some sort of habitual behaviour for yourself. In particular, I want you to recall what you did to set that habit up. Things, the way that you mentally organised yourself, the way that you prepared yourself in order to make that behavioural change. What do you remember about that?
I'm thinking like one thing that is very habitual for me is that I ride my bike to work and to my office. And that's not a grand statement of my commitment to fitness, by the way, because I actually live really, really close to the university where I work. But what's interesting is the university, how it's situated, is I live. It's sort of the boundaries of the university are circumnavigated by this creek, this watercourse, and I live on the other side of the watercourse. And very close to my house is a bridge. It's actually quite a famous little iconic bridge called the Swing Bridge, and I can ride a bike across there. And once I've done that, I'm literally like half a mile from my office. So I can almost, from my home, I can actually almost see my office. That's if I ride my bike. If I drive to work, it's actually about a 5-6 kilometre, which is sort of 3 mile drive. And when I moved to this house, I thought, I am not going to drive. That's just like, it felt like a complete waste having to drive all that distance to get around when I could just literally ride so quickly. So I thought, this is it. I'm going to be known for riding my bike to work. And so I actually had to put some preparations in place. And that was, I thought, what are they going to be the barriers here for me? One, definitely it would be the ease of getting access to a bike. And I thought, so I need it just sort of sitting in a really obvious place so that I can actually access it when I'm leaving office, when I store it at home. And so I actually went as far, I found this really cheap clapped out bike that I didn't care if it got stolen. So I didn't even have to go to the trouble of padlocking it to anywhere. I just thought, if it goes, it goes. And it actually served me so well. It actually, because there was a simplicity to it. And I remember there was a real intentionality about knowing myself that it needed to be really simple for me to be able to action that. And I still do it to this day. So I've actually changed my bike, and I actually now carry it up into my office because I figure that's a little bit more exercise and it's good for me. But I remember actually being very focused on, that's what I want to cement, that habit. And so I need to put these plans in place so that it will be easy and the sort of default for me.
And did I hear correctly that you decided all this just as you were moving house as well?
Yes. Well, I moved to that house, which was located obviously in that spot.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. So we'll see why that's so interesting shortly. So we're going to talk today about something called the habit discontinuity hypothesis. And this came from a piece of research work by Verplanken and Roy about 8 years ago, 2016. This particular paper was published, and it's a study that illuminates for us how significant life events, for example, such as moving house, can actually create rather than hinder opportunities for behavioural change. So let's start by understanding the habit discontinuity hypothesis. Essentially, this hypothesis says when you experience some disruption in your routine, it creates the conditions in which you're now more open to adopting new behaviours. Now, straight away, this is interesting because we have, many of us, I think, have a paradigm around behavioural change, beliefs around behavioural change, in which we say to ourselves, I'll start making that change when, my plate is clear, when my calendar is clear, when I'm not so focused on, doing these other sorts of things, making these other sorts of changes. Sometimes we have a paradigm that says, I'll make this change first, then I'll start focusing on making that change. In other words, we serialize changes rather than making them in parallel. And I think possibly the thinking behind that is, if we try and do too much, we're going to fail.
Yes.
If we create too many moving pieces, it's all too hard. The habit discontinuity hypothesis suggests that there might be something different at play, and suggests that if we're already engaged in some significant change, then we might be more receptive to new information, to different information. We might be more receptive to the idea of making some other changes in our lives as well. So that's the basis of the hypothesis, and it's interesting for us because I think it challenges one of those commonly held beliefs that many of us have about behavioural change, and in particular about the timing of that.
That makes sense to me, actually. So essentially, what you're saying is that because there is this prevailing thought that, hey, don't change too much in the at the one time, because you're setting yourself up for failure. But what I suppose this hypothesis is indicating, that those disruptive periods might be a very ripe time to actually make substantive changes in a number of different domains. Is that what it's saying?
Yeah. And if you perhaps reflect on this for yourself, I suspect you could identify many other situations in which you started making some significant change, and then something else came to you, or something else occurred to you, or then you recognised that it might be possible to make some other change in your life. And I think this has a really important application for lifestyle medicine, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I think there's potentially some really great insights we can get in thinking about how we can support our patients and clients and even friends and family members to engage in behavioural change.
One of the subjects that I've taught for a number of years here at the university is skill acquisition. So it's actually looking at how we acquire new skills, and we're talking about the context of physical performance. But one thing we know is that once you start to rehearse and practice a particular skill, just from a brain plasticity perspective, those neurons that fire together, they start to wire together, and it gets to the point where that just becomes so automated. Which is great if you're doing it right. And there's this classic quote, we talk about practice makes perfect, and that's not true. Only perfect practice makes perfect. What practice does, practice makes permanent. And if you're practicing the wrong thing, you don't want that. You don't want that permanency associated with it. But what's incredibly hard is to disrupt that and to actually change. Even something as simple as a tennis serve, you can actually watch someone do it, and it just becomes so built into the fabric of who they are. It's like my brother is also a lecturer at this university, and if he's way in the distance, I can actually tell it's him by the way he walks. These skills become, you can actually see these movement patterns become very, very well ingrained. But changing them is really, really difficult. And what it does take, we know, is some disruptive event almost, or some way of actually breaking that pattern to unlock it so that it has potential for change. So I'm intrigued. Tell us more.
And it may be that what's going on there is that the major disruption allows you to start calling into question some other things that you've thought or believed or even valued, and start making those changes. So the basis of the study, which Verplanken and Roy used for this, you'll appreciate because of your own experience. So they gathered together 800 people who were either given an intervention to promote some sort of sustainable behavioural change, or they were put into a control group. Half of those participants had just moved to a new house, and the other half hadn't. And so that allowed the researchers to look at these two groups of people where one had made a really recent major change. In addition to that intervention, they then conducted focus groups and face-to-face interviews, and also gave some people information about how to sustain behavioural change as well. So they were given some support in this process. But one of the key findings from this study was absolutely fascinating. In fact, I'm going to ask. Or you probably know the answer now, given the conversation we've been having. But out of the group of people who had just moved house and had to make a behavioural change, and the group of people who didn't move house and had to make a behavioural change, who do you think was more successful?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the former, this is fascinating because we didn't, but I should tell the listeners, we did not prime this at all. This is completely organic. And so it's interesting that I volunteered the idea that this habit change for me actually occurred at the time I moved homes. So I'm going to go with that actually that quite disruptive aspect to their life had actually catalysed this potential for staying with the new behaviour.
And it's straight away interesting because if you've ever had an experience of moving house, and I've thankfully done it a small number of times in my life, but it is an incredibly disruptive experience. It can be an incredibly stressful experience, even though typically we move because we feel like we're moving into a situation that's going to be better than the one that we're currently in. So that maybe that's a bigger house, or a differently located house, or a different suburb or town or city or country even that you might move to. Nevertheless, it's a very, very disruptive process to go through. We often have an experience of being thrown into chaos, of things being disrupted, losing things, losing ourselves, forgetting things, and so on. So there's that on the one hand. Yet this study showed that the people who were engaged in that process were more likely to be able to sustain a particular behavioural change. Not only that, the findings got even more fascinating. That window of opportunity lasted for about 3 months after the move.
3 months after it.
Yeah.
This is intriguing because certainly before hearing this, the conventional advice would have been, now's not the time to be making behaviour change.
Exactly.
But
moving house,
it would actually
let's just get that over with.
Put that on pause. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And this study really suggests something quite different. Now, we should say here, we've talked about in the past, wanting to keep what we talk about in the house of science, and one of the things that's important to acknowledge here is that the effect size was small, and also the pool of people was small. 800 people out of the population of the world, not very many. Nevertheless, the change, the impact of this particular intervention was noticeable in the group who had recently moved house. So this takes us back then to the idea of the underlying mechanism. So if we're now saying that, well, perhaps that set of beliefs that we carry with us around making change isn't so helpful, what might an explanatory mechanism be for why we see this effect? One possibility, of course, is that because so many in a major event like moving house, so many things end up being suspended. So many things end up being changed. It's like taking the lid off something, or uncovering things so they're exposed to the air more.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
I like that analogy you've used of sort of opening the lid on it, because it's almost like it's a time where we sort of look inside and actually do a bit of self-reflection. We have this opportunity to go, hey, why have I been doing these things, and are they working, and what's not working? So maybe as part of that in the mix. And it actually even makes me think of, one of the questions I've got for you is, I love the idea of using these as these sort of disruptive experiences like moving house as an opportunity to create behaviour change. But I'm really not keen to move house, and certainly not every time I want to create a new habit. So what are other things that we can do to replicate that same experience? But I do wonder whether COVID was like this for many people. I certainly, in the people I were interacting with, there was a lot of talk about people going, I don't think I want to do that so much anymore. I used to do that. That was part of, how I functioned, but it was that evaluation aspect to it. So I wonder whether there's a bit of that in the mix.
And this is another fascinating dimension to it as well. So it's not only the behaviour that was able to change and also be sustained, but of course behaviours come from they don't just come out of the blue. They exist in a cycle with the thoughts we have, the emotions that we have, the beliefs that we have, the values that we have. And all of those things reinforce each other. So at some level, if we're making a behavioural change, it's also because we've adjusted a value at some point. We've adjusted a value that we have. We've made something mean a little more to us, or be a little more worthwhile to us, and perhaps we've made something else be a little less worthwhile to us also. So there's also a lot going on beneath the surface when we make a behavioural change, and particularly in this sort of context. It has this study, I think, has some really fascinating implications for how we might work with people in a lifestyle medicine context for behavioural change. So we all know what the pillars of lifestyle medicine are, and we all know typically that in managing chronic disease, for example, people need to make changes to more than one area of their life. It might be diet and level of activity, might be sleeping patterns, Potentially, all six pillars might need some degree of attention. So what's the best way to go about this then? Is it best to say, well, for the next 6 months, we'll just focus on diet and then we'll focus on exercise and so on? Well, this study, I think, suggests that there's likely to be more benefit in focusing simultaneously on a number of those areas. And importantly, and I think this is a key part of it, that means that we need to shift our paradigm or shift our belief about what we are capable of as people. We're not creatures who can only manage one step at a time and get easily overwhelmed by the magnitude or the number of changes. We're probably more likely to be creatures who can do moderately well at a number of different areas simultaneously. And at some level, that seems to describe kind of the human body, doesn't it? None of us has a body that's perfectly built for stair climbing. Absolutely maximizes our capacity for stair climbing. None of us has a body or a system that's perfectly built for, I don't know, precision in something, archery or cutting things or whatever it might be. None of us is perfectly built to drive a car, but we are all built to do moderately well at a bunch of different things in our lives. We can all be moderately good drivers, moderately good stair climbers, moderately good at maintaining a good diet, good sleeping patterns, and so on. So harnessing this idea, I think, is really important. We can do multiple things at once, and in fact, there's probably a lot of benefit to be had in targeting multiple behaviours at once. There's one other dimension to this as well, and that is kind of what we've been talking about. That from the patient perspective or from the client perspective, simply engaging in one change probably also shifts our thinking about other changes as well. And as clinicians, we need to be alert to that. We need to be curious about what else might have shifted for this person. So even if they've started only focusing on one behavioural change, even if they've only started on diet, being curious about what else has shifted for you, what else have you started to think about, what else are you interested in, what else are you curious about now, might reveal that the person has also started thinking about, well, now that I'm eating a bit better, I'm waking up in the morning with more energy. And I feel like I want to do something with that energy. Wonderful. We've just started laying the groundwork then, potentially, for another change.
What I'm hearing about that and asking those questions like, what would I like to change in this regard or that change? I think for me, that really speaks to the intentionality piece of it too. And I've got to confess, sometimes I'm not good with this. I just sort of you get swept along, and all of a sudden you can form habits and get into patterns of behaviours that you weren't intentional about in the first instance. But I think what this study's saying to me and what I'm learning is that firstly, capitalize on those disruptive moments in your life, and then B, realize that they can be a really fruitful and productive time for behaviour change in a multimodal fashion. It's interesting. Yeah. This is making me think. My wife and I were just talking literally last week because we've got this interesting scenario coming up. It's not a house move. Well, I hope not. We're not planning on moving a house because I've been in my house for like 30 years now, and there would be a nightmare trying to move all the things we have. But what we do have is our third child is heading off to university shortly. And this is a time of change, very significant change. We're moving into that empty nester stage of life, and my wife, she's actually very good at being intentional about a whole range of things. But she instigated this discussion as what does this look like for us? What do we want to do? What new things do we want to put in place so that it is a positive experience? And and I'm thinking, well, there is opportunity probably at that sort of changing of the guard to actually instigate a whole lot of positive new habits in our lives.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I like that. What can
And
you
so
think of other? Oh, sorry.
no. It's a lovely example of the significant life change, creating a situation in which there's now openness to other change as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
What could obviously moving house is not a fun one. What other life changes? What other ripe opportunities could you see for people in terms of the potential to instigate significant life, habit formation change?
I think potentially there's potentially I think there's a very large number, and importantly, I think the particular change needs to matter to the person. So, in other words, something that I might consider for myself is significant might not be significant enough for you, but there might be something that happens in your life that's enough to do that. So, the sorts of things that come to mind. Moving house, of course. You've mentioned children growing up and moving on, a job change,
Yes.
a career change, a change in the status of significant relationships, even significant changes, for example, like losing a lot of weight. So think about someone who perhaps has been overweight or obese and now lost a significant amount of weight. One of the things that's often said about those changes is that it takes time for that person to get used to this kind of new version of themselves, if you like. They have to start seeing themselves in different ways than they're used to seeing themselves. So even a significant change like that, I think, has the potential to form the background or the context for other changes. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. I think this definitely does flip it on the head in terms of the conventional wisdom of, be kind to yourself. Don't, that's a period of change. Don't do too many other things. To actually view that as an opportunity for significant change, and being intentional about, saying, well, what do I want? What would I love to see that emerge from this? I think I like that. I think there's real power in that.
And from a clinical perspective, I think it then becomes important for us to recognise the potential of that, and then to be actively curious with people that we're working with about what might be on their minds. To ask them what else might be possible here. What other areas of your health or your well-being? What other areas of your life might you be interested in making some changes in, and being confident that as human beings we're sufficiently adapted to be able to manage those multiple changes at once. We are, in fact, Darren, people who can walk and chew gum at the same time.
We're multitaskers. Well, I really appreciate this discussion. Just to loop back to my story at the start, my students are all so thoroughly impressed that they see me ride my bike to work every day, almost without fail. I'll even be at home, and if it's raining, even it looks like there's a little gap, I just wait and then I do the sprint and I get to work. Anyway, my students are so impressed until they learn where I live. And literally, you can almost see, across the fields to my place. And I've had so many students that I think had sort of, viewed me as, wow, look at this guy. He's just so active and so committed to his exercise. And then they sort of just lower their head as they go, you live there? Like it ruins their view of me in some regards. But anyway.
So speaking of things that got ruined, I was very disappointed at the beginning of our conversation when you told me about a famous bridge just near your back door. And I thought you were going to tell me it was named the Darren Morton Bridge.
No, I have no naming rights, and I don't, and I can't see anything like that happening in a hurry. But I'm content anyway, brother.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. In the meantime, dear listeners, please subscribe if you're enjoying the podcast. Subscribing means that you'll have us landing in your podcast feed without even thinking twice about it. You won't have to go hunting for us anywhere. You'll get every next episode right as it's published. If you have a lifestyle medicine question that you would like us to discuss, please email us, and we would love to hear from you, and love to engage with the ideas and the topics that you'd love to explore as well.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.